Good day, everyone. My name is Roslyn M. Flores, and today I'm going to tackle about the Obligation and Contract Article 1305 to 1307. Article 1305. A contract is a meeting of minds between two persons whereby one binds himself with respect to the other to give something or to render some service. This article gives the definition of a contract. Says or it lay emphasis on the meeting of the minds between two contracting parties which takes place when an offer by one party is accepted by the others. We have here an example in the Article 1305. Example, when Kiefer offers to sell his cake to Katana in the amount of 700 pesos and Katana agrees to the cost, there is a perfected contract of sale. I've said on my definition, parties should have an agreement and has a contract that should be followed. There are 7 different kinds of classification of contracts that we are going to tackle as we continue our discussion. The first one is the classifications of contract according to the perfection or formation. It is classified into 3, which are the consensual, real contracts, and formal. Consensual. It is perfected by mere agreement of the parties. It means that it is having the consent of the other party. For example, the sales and the lease. Number 2, the real contracts that requires not only the consent of the parties for their perfection but also the delivery of the object by one party to the other. Example, the comodatum or deposit. Also, in the real contract, there is a need to deliver the object so that the contract will be completed. Number 3, the formal contract or solemn contract. It requires some particular form, for example, the donation, the mortgage, and it needs special formalities so the contract can be perfected. Classification of contract according to cost or equivalent value of prestation. Number 1, the onerous. Each of the parties aspires to procure to himself a benefit through the giving of an equivalent or compensation, example, the sale. And also, onerous has equivalent valuable consideration. Aside from that, there should be or there should have the need to have an interchange, and that is the onerous. The second one is the gratuitous. It means that one of the parties proposes to give to the other a benefit without any equivalent or compensation. It means that the partnership can't receive anything or equivalent to compensation because it is free. That's why it's called gratuitous. Remunerative. It means that for service previously rendered and it is given for a benefit or service. Classification of contract according to degree of dependence or the importance of dependence of one another. And number 1 is the principal. A principal contract is one which can be subset independently from other contract and whose purpose can be fulfilled by themselves. Example, the sales or the less. And it is effective if the contract stand alone. Number 2, accessory. An accessory contract is one which can exist only as a consequence or in relation with another prior contract. Example, the pledge or mortgage. Mortgage is the best example because it needs formal obligations as loan. Number 3, preparatory. A preparatory contract is one which has for its object the establishment of a condition in law which is necessary as a preliminary steps towards the celebration of another subsequent contract. Example is a partnership and agency. We can call it preparatory if the parties still doesn't consider the contract by itself but it is only means for a transaction or contracts to be made. Classification of contract according to parties obligated are classified into two, which are the unilateral and the bilateral. Number 1, the unilateral contract is one which gives rise to an obligation for only one of the parties. It means that there is only one of the parties that has an obligation. Example, the comodatum, the gratuitous deposit. And also, it should still have a consent even though it is unilateral, because the giving of the consent should be bilateral or both sides of the party should decide. Bilateral. A bilateral contract is one which gives rise to reciprocal obligations for both parties. Example, the sale or lease. So it means that both parties are required to render obligations. It depends on how many parties are involved. Just for example, this one. The seller has the obligation and the buyer has an obligation too. Classification of contract according to name or designation are classified into two, the nominate and innominate. To simplify the term nominate, it has a particular name or designated mention that has given by law. Example, the contract of partnership, contract of sales, etc. Aside from that, they have also specific rules that govern them. Innominate contract. To simplify this word or term, the contract that hasn't given names or a special name. It means it is still unknown. Classification of contract according to subject matter. Number 1, involving things. Example, the sale, deposit, and pledge. Number 2, involving rights or credits. The example of this is the usufruct, the assignment of credits. Number 3, involving services. The example of this one is the agency, the lease of services. And the last classification of contract, that is according to the number of person who participated in the drafting of contract. Number 1, the ordinary contract. The example of it is the sale, and it says that both parties involves or participated in the drafting of the contract. Number 2, the contract of adhesion. The example of this is the insurance contract that is already drafted, and it is only prepared by one person or one party. Usually, the only participation of the other parties is to sign in his name if he or she will accept it. Example is the contract of the real estate company. Article 1306. The contracting parties may establish such stipulations, clauses, terms, and conditions as they may deem convenient, provided they are not contrary to law, morals, good customs, public order, or public policy. This article stresses the freedom to contract, the right of the people or the freedom to enter into a lawful contract as to their own convenience and advantage, as long as the contract are not prohibited or contrary to the law. Just what I've said. You should have a good moral, a good customs, following the public order or even the public policy, so that So, Article 1307. Innominate contracts shall be regulated by the stipulations of the parties, by the provisions of Title 1 and 2 of this book, by the rules governing the most analogous nominate contracts, by the customs of the place. So, innominate contracts are in the absence of stipulations and specific provisions of the law on the matter to be governed by rules applicable to the most analogous contracts. The innominate contracts are classified into four. First is the do ut des, means I give that you may give. Number two, do ut facias, I give that you may do. Number three, facio ut des, means I do what that you may give. Number four, facio ut facias, I do and you do. And this is being addressed by the Article 1307. And that's the end of my discussion. I hope you learned something. Have a blessed day ahead.